All right, so let's get started with some of these chapter lectures. Chapter 1 is just basically an introduction to some general concepts that revolve around anatomy and physiology. Obviously the two major concepts that we need to talk about is differentiating between anatomy and physiology. When we study anatomy, anatomy is a study of structure. Okay, when I say structure, I mean the parts. So when you study anatomy, it's about, for example, if you want to talk about the anatomy of the heart, okay, where is the heart located? Okay, part of understanding parts is where they're found. Okay, so where's the heart located? In the mediastinum of the chest, all right, which is a space between the lungs. That's a word you'll be more acquainted with much later on. Okay, and then what are all the various parts of the heart? For example, what are the four chambers of the heart called? The atria, the ventricles, the major blood vessels of the heart, the arteries and the veins, the apex of the heart, the auricles of the heart, the septums in between the chambers, okay? So we can kind of, just kind of doodle this out a little bit. So you got a heart, okay, you've got chambers. All right, that would be anatomy right there, okay? Whereas physiology is the study of function, okay? So basically, how do the parts work? Okay, we know where the parts are located, we know what they do, we know where the parts are located, we know their orientation, we know their makeup, okay? How do these parts function, okay? What do they actually do, okay? That's physiology, all right? And when we want to gain an understanding of anatomy and physiology, we have to look at this from many different levels, okay? Anatomy is a little easier to study because, there are various levels of anatomy that you can, use various tools to take a look at. And, the biggest tool that you guys can utilize are your own two eyes, okay? A big part of understanding anatomy is just seeing what you're trying to learn and understand, okay? That's why that's why there are labs, that's why there are dissections, so we can, I can sit here and talk about all these parts of the heart, but realistically, in order for you to gain a real good understanding of it, it's important to actually dissect it out and look at all the different parts, okay? So that would be gross anatomy, okay? Then we'll take that a step farther, as we go through the course and look at histology, the study of tissues, okay? And when you look at tissues, you need to, you're looking at cells, okay, underneath the microscope, the different types of cells, how they're organized, the environments you find them in, the shapes, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we'll go more into that when we get to the chapter on histology, but that's anatomy. Because, for example, if we want to really get in depth and look at the physiology of the heart, how the heart functions, okay, we have to understand how the tissue is designed on the microscopic level. What a muscle cell actually looks like. Okay, underneath the microscope, it's, striated characteristics, nucleus, and all the spacing between the cells and all that, because that really, brings a much more in-depth understanding of the, of how the heart works. Okay, so that's histology. Looking at tissues under a microscope, which would, fall under microscopic anatomy. And always, something interesting in anatomy to kind of take a look at is comparative anatomy. Okay, comparing, because our parts are located where they are for a reason. Okay, our parts, our body parts allow us to function, so basically trying to figure out why a heart may be in one spot in one animal and in another spot in another animal. Why monkeys have certain blood vessels that we don't have, and things like that. Comparative anatomy is just interesting. Okay, it's interesting, but it also brings forth a good understanding into the real function of the organism that you're trying to talk about. Now, obviously, this is human anatomy and physiology, so our focus is going to be there. But from time to time, I'll bring up animal examples just because, like I said, it's interesting to talk about, and it helps, again, foster a more in-depth understanding of functionality. Okay, and physiology, basically, when we look at physiology, we look at individual organs and the organ, within organ systems, and we talk about how those individual organs, their specific functions and how organs within a system work together. And then we basically, start to tie all the organ systems together, all 11 organ systems of the body together to show the vast interrelationship between all of these various parts, because, we need these to survive. But, obviously it's a lot easier to separate these from system to system and part to part, and then connect the dots as you go. So that's anatomy and physiology, the study of structure and function. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to studying anatomy, your eyes, a microscope, and some imagination are going to be required to really foster a good understanding of this. Because anatomy is very visual. I can't sit here and explain stuff to you. You have to, and make you experts at this. You guys are going to have to look at a lot of pictures. That's why we do the labs. It's why you guys come in and dissect body parts and look at tissues under a microscope. I'll be using various images as I lecture to just, again, make this stuff more understandable. Okay, and when it comes to physiology is, I like physiology. It's fun because, for starters, it's hard to understand how body parts work if you don't understand their composition. Okay, it's hard to gain an understanding of the heart if you don't understand, again, where the chambers of the heart are located, what the chambers do, the valves in between the chambers. Okay, the certain anatomic points like the apex, the certain arteries that branch off the heart. Okay, functionality, requires a knowledge of where the parts are located. Same thing with an auto mechanic. Okay, a lot of you probably know what the alternator does for your car. Okay, it keeps your battery charged. Okay, and if the alternator fails, your battery's gonna keep dying. It's not gonna be able to maintain a charge. You're gonna have to keep jump starting your car. Okay, that's great, but you can't replace the alternator without knowing where the thing is. Okay, so you have to understand where the parts are located. All right, and a part of this is logical thinking, because with physiology, when we talk about physiologic concepts, there's a lot of concepts that are very step by step by step. And like I said, a lot of physiology is connecting dots, trying to look at the individuality of body parts, but at the same time, making the connections between how these individual parts work together to keep us alive. Okay, and this is important, which in the next chapter I'm going to go over a basic knowledge of chemistry and cell biology. As much as I hate chemistry, it is important to understand. I love cell biology. This is what I minored in, so I love cell. But chemistry I never liked, but that doesn't mean it's not important. Okay, so there is some basic now, and I'll go over this in chapter 2, the basic chemistry you really need to understand to make physiology make more sense. Okay. And again, as I put in this bullet point, if you put all this together and you stay diligent on top of things, this will bring forth a very good understanding of anatomy and physiology, as long as you work hard at it. Okay, and your book talks a little bit about complementary principles. Okay, and which makes sense, because anatomy and physiology, we need both in order to stay alive. Function cannot occur without a structure. How can blood flow occur without a pump to circulate it around the body? Okay, excuse me. And very often, functions are dictated by form, by shape, by how the structures are oriented, by their cellular makeup. Okay, so so anatomy and physiology have a very interconnected relationship with one another. Okay, we need both to stay alive, and you need to have a good understanding of both to be successful in what you want to do. Okay, and this kind of leads me into the next part of this. Sorry, taking a water break. Kind of leads me on the next part of the discussion. What is life? Because when you're studying anatomy and physiology, when you're going into healthcare and you want to work in the field of medicine, okay, you're doing this to make people's lives better, to save people's lives, okay, to prolong life. Okay, and realistically, what is life? I've always thought this is an interesting question to ponder, and there's various directions you can take a look at this. Take a look at this question with. There is, you can look at this from a philosophical standpoint. Socrates, had a lot to say about this. When he wrote in the Republic, when he talked about basically. When he uses cave analogy, and he basically, described that we are, again, this is a very watered down version of this, but he talked about how we're just reminiscence, we're shadows of former objects. So we're, and, again, it's just, I don't really want to go too in depth with that, but, But there's philosophical. You can take a look at this from a science standpoint. Obviously, I mean, this is a science class. Schrodinger's paradox. Okay, order comes from disorder. Okay, you're going to learn about this when we get into chapter 2 and 3, and we talk about chemical reactions and cells and movement of molecules or ions, into or out of cells. Okay, there needs to be some kind of chaos on the molecular level for us to stay alive. Okay, but the main focus for this to answer this question so far is the cell theory. Okay, that we're going to talk about more in chapter 3. That Hooke and Schwann came up with, and that we came up with what's called the modern cell theory, and I'll talk about this more later on, but this revolves around basically that life cannot occur without the cell. Okay, that the cell is the functional unit that drives life. Okay, and this leads me into this part. Basically, yeah, in terms of understanding us, being alive, at what structural level does life actually begin? Okay, because when we kind of take a look at how we're organized, I mean, we have to talk about matter, and bear in mind, matter, general chemistry, physics term, matter is basically anything that takes up space and that has mass. Okay, so some kind of physical presence. All right, atoms are the smallest, simplest form of matter out there in nature. You can't see them with your naked eye, you can't see them with a regular microscope. Okay, but we know there are atoms out there that have various behaviors. For example, when you talk about carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, I don't know, nitrogen, okay, and so on. Okay, these are all individual, potassium, these are all individual atoms, okay, that again, that have various behaviors. And when you start putting these atoms together and making various combinations of them, then you form molecules and compounds. Okay, so these, for example, glucose. Okay, a glucose molecule, or a protein. Okay, or a lipid, a fat. Okay, a hormone, an eicosanoid, which is a chemical message, a structural protein, a cell membrane. Okay, whatever it is we're talking about. Okay, those are molecules. Okay, molecules are various atoms put together. But is a sugar molecule alive? Does a sugar molecule reproduce all on its own? Does a protein make more copies of itself all by itself? No, they don't. Okay, they don't have metabolisms. They're fuels that drive our metabolisms or to give us structure, but they're not actually living entities. Okay, and then organelles. Okay, when you start putting different molecules together in different arrangements, you form these more complex structures called organelles. Organelles are basically, if you look at a cell, and again we'll look at these much more in depth in chapter 3. Okay, when you take a look at a cell has a few distinct parts. A cell has an outer border, which is what we call the plasma membrane, or more simply put, the cell membrane. Okay, and there's then there's the inner workings of the cell, the cytoplasm, where you find all the various parts, like the nucleus, the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, ribosomes, and so on. Okay, and what these individual parts are, they're basically sacs that have various enzymes that drive biochemical reactions. Okay, but these individual organelles, for example, let's take a mitochondrion. A mitochondrion is used to basically generate high amounts of ATP. You'll learn in chapter 2 that ATP is cellular energy. It's fuel to drive the activity of the cell. Okay, but can this mitochondrion all by itself, does this really serve a purpose? Does it? I mean, yes, it does. It's a fuel factory for the cell, but can a mitochondrion all on its own drive life? No, because you need to put all these various parts together and organize them. Okay, it's just like a alternator or a radiator in a car. Okay, those parts, sure, they have individual functions, but what's the purpose of a radiator if it's leaning up against a tree? Okay, there is none. All right. But then when you take all the parts and put them together and you organize them, for example, with the cell, you put all the organelles together, then you start to see life take place. Okay. then the nucleus, the DNA inside the nucleus can start to use all the other organelles, the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi, ribosomes, to make proteins. Chemical reactions can take place. Mitochondria can provide fuel for the cell. Okay, there can be interaction with cells and other cells. Okay, this is where life begins at the cellular level. Okay, and again, this is where I said, in my tips for success, this is where I say to kind of have an open mind with this, because you hear a lot of, you hear a lot in politics, people like to talk about this. Again, this is what it is, okay? This isn't an argument about pro-life, pro-choice, where does life begin, blah, blah, blah. This is what it is, okay? This is science, okay? And life begins at the cellular level, all right? And then when you start to put tissues together, okay, no, I'm sorry. When you start to take cells of different varieties and organize them and put them together, and then you form tissues. Okay, and then once you start to take tissues, different tissues, and put them together, you form specific organs. And then you put organs together, you form organ systems, and then once you put all 11 organ systems together, we have the human organism. Okay, and one other kind of essential part of life, I think, for us as humans is our population systems. Okay, I say this because I guess I just want to ask you listeners out there this question: how long do you think you could go without any human contact? How well do you think you can survive on your own, growing your own food? Hunting your own food, okay, making your own clothing, okay, fueling your house, heck, building a place for yourself to live, doing everything on your own with no other human contact. How long do you think you could survive? Okay, we're not an organism that's very well designed to survive on our own. We need each other to survive. Okay, and you will go crazy after a while without a lot of human contact. Okay, everybody's different. There are some people that are going to last longer than others, but in the end, we are designed to work together as well. So I think we need each other, and not just our anatomy and our individual anatomy and physiology, but we need everybody else's as well. So again, this image is from Mary Van Hove's textbook. It's a textbook we use in class, 10th edition. Again, this just kind of sums up what I just talked about. You have atoms, the smallest level of organization. You put them together to form molecules. Molecules form organelles. Organelles form, you put two or more different kinds of organelles together and you make cells. Then you put different cells together and make tissue. This is smooth muscle tissue. And then you put two or more different tissue types together, and you now have an organ. This is a blood vessel, obviously. And then you put all the organs together, and now you have, an organ. Well, you have an organ system, and then you put all the organ systems together, and you now have the human organism. Okay, but at what point in time does life begin along this hierarchy? Well, what I like to call hierarchy of organization. It's here. It's at the cellular level. Okay, when we design the cell, that's life. Okay, and bear in mind that so then in talking about this, that when we want to discuss and understand physiology, we have to go all the way down to the cellular level to really gain a good understanding of physiology and how functionality brings life about and the maintenance of life. Okay, so a big part of our physiology on a day-to-day basis is keeping our cells alive. Okay, for example, if we talk about the respiratory system, okay, and you talk about the physiology of bringing oxygen into the lungs. Okay, and the purpose of the gas exchange of getting rid of carbon dioxide and getting oxygen in the blood. Okay, that's one major physiologic function that cells rely on. Okay, when we talk about action potentials and neurons sending nervous impulses, okay, to communicate with cells to alter their activity to keep them alive. Okay, talk about how physiologically how the heart circulates blood. Okay, in order to keep cells alive, in order to keep ourselves alive, okay, this, everything revolves, this is where physiology revolves around. Okay, and a more applied aspect of this then when you guys are going to have to take pathophysiology, if you understand how the body works at the cellular level, then pathophysiology is a relatively simple concept to grasp, because what are the changes that occur, what are the pathologic changes that occur at the cellular level? Okay, because, if you want to understand, what drives a disease to take place, heart disease, emphysema, whatever it is you're talking about, okay, what are the cellular changes that occur that make the tissue go awry, that make diseases occur. So, okay. So again, keep this in mind, that basically cells drive life, and that's what we spend our daily activity and energy doing, is maintaining life at the cellular level. Okay. And basically, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, sorry, another water break, requirements for life. Okay, these are basically, when I say requirements for life, these are some very basic factors that keep us going. Okay, so for example, boundaries. Okay, so I'm not talking about, personal bubbles and psychologic, stuff. I'm talking about physical boundaries. Okay, there has to be borders between our tissues and between our cells and our organs, but more importantly, there has to be some kind of a border that's protecting the internal environment of our body from the external environment, the world. Okay, and you guys can probably figure out what that is. That would be skin. Okay, skin is our major outer border. Okay, then there's various other connective tissues that act as borders as well. Okay, movement. Okay, we need to be able to move. Okay, movement. When it comes to movement, why do we need to move? Why do us as humans need movement? One of those, reasons for movement is, getting the food. Nowadays we live in a very modernized society with a lot of conveniences, but still, the food isn't going to get from the refrigerator to the recliner. Okay. We have to be able to get up and get to where we can survive. Same thing with water. You don't see this a lot, anymore. But we don't really have to deal with predators that much. Okay, but if you and your buddy are walking through the woods and you encounter a bear, and the bear's not happy about you being there, call me crazy, you're probably going to have to move out of that situation. So you're going to have to outrun your friend to make sure you don't get eaten. Don't do that. Stick up for your friend. But that's movement. Okay. We need to be able to respond to stay alive. Okay. Responsiveness. This is a big one. Okay. Well, before I get into that, I'm sorry. Movement. What organ systems drive movement? Okay, obviously you guys are going to say muscles. Okay, and also bones, the skeletal system. Okay, responsiveness is a big one. Okay, responsiveness is a big one, because I'm going to go a little more in depth in this in a little bit. Basically when I say responsiveness, think of this as responding to changes, okay? There are changes that are occurring all the time in our environments, whether it's our external environment, the outside world, or our internal environment. And these changes that are occurring all the time, we need to be able to adapt to them. And if we don't, we will die. Okay, and more importantly, the biggest systems in the body that are responsible for this are the nervous and the endocrine systems, okay? And again, I'll get more into responsiveness in a little bit when I talk about homeostasis. All right. Digestion. You could probably do the math on what system we use for digestion. The digestive system. Digestion is, to simply put it, is breaking food down into its simplest form. Okay, we break food down into its smallest building blocks, its smallest parts, so we can absorb it into our bloodstream and make use of it. Okay, but the digestive system is more than just breaking down food. You have to be able to eat the food, you have to be able to break it down, you have to be able to absorb it, and you have to be able to excrete whatever you don't absorb. Okay, and understanding those four major functions of the digestive system, if you understand those four basic concepts, then you can understand certain diseases like Crohn's, or certain diseases or problems like diarrhea, things like that. Okay, metabolism. 9 times out of 10, when I ask people what metabolism is, probably almost 10 times out of 10, or I'll ask you guys this question, give you a second to think about it. What is metabolism? What is it? When you hear the word metabolism, what pops into your head? I'm sure most of you are probably thinking when you hear metabolism, burning calories or digesting food you ate, somewhere along those lines. And that's not incorrect to think that. You are right. But that's only half the equation, okay? Metabolism is basically about chemical reactions, all right? And there really isn't a specific organ system that's responsible for this because all organ systems have metabolism, okay? There are certain systems that help us regulate this, like the endocrine system, the nervous system, things like that. But metabolism is about all the chemical reactions that occur in the body. Okay, and again, if you go back to, what constitutes life, yeah, it does take chemical reactions to create, molecules and organelles, but the life-giving chemical reactions occur within the cell itself. So when you put all the organelles together, and then you're using these elements and atoms to make molecules that drive our life. Okay, so that's metabolism, building and breaking chemical bonds, all the chemical reactions that occur within the body. Okay, and also a big part of, which kind of leads me to the next part, where there's metabolism, there has to be excretion. Okay, the reason for this is because where there's metabolism, there's going to be waste. Okay, whenever you're breaking down organic molecules, there are going to be waste products left over, plain and simple. Okay, and some of the more common, carbon dioxide is probably the most familiar waste product you guys hear about. What do we use to eliminate carbon dioxide? The respiratory system. Okay, that system is not just about getting oxygen in our body, but about getting rid of waste as well. Okay, another probably just as an important system is the urinary system. Your kidneys are probably the biggest waste filtering organs of the body. Okay, without kidneys, you're not going to live very long. Okay, so your kidneys eliminate a lot of metabolic waste. We can eliminate waste through our skin. Okay, you can sweat out some waste, through digestion. You can excrete, some, waste through there. Okay, but the kidneys are probably the biggest ones there. All right, so excretion is big, okay, and cells are constantly excreting waste products all the time. Why do you have an exhaust system on your car? Okay, as you burn fuel, so you can, create compression to drive the pistons and, make the engine work. Okay, you're going to produce waste products, and that's what the exhaust system is for, to run the waste out of the engine and not into the cab of your car, because a big part of that waste is carbon monoxide. Okay, and as you guys all know, you don't want to be breathing that in. Okay, so excretion, where there's metabolism, excretion is a must, because we need to eliminate waste, okay, organic waste products. Reproduction. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, again, as the systems, the reproductive systems, but also a requirement for life, because reproduction allows allows us to continue the continuity of life. Okay, as a species, we can't survive if we're not reproducing, plain and simple. Okay, so this is an extremely important organ system, and again, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I don't need a lot of in-depth talk with that. But reproduction, again, as a species, we need to be able to reproduce, plain and simple. And also reproduce faster than we're dying off. That's why there are some, like, for example, panda bears. Yes, poaching is a problem with panda bears, but also, mammals, and big mammals in general, it takes a long time for them to reach sexual maturity, the point where they can actually reproduce. So yeah, they're being poached, but again, it takes them a while to get to a mature age to reproduce. That's another big reason why they're going out. Us as humans, if you really think about it, when are we physiologically mature to reproduce? I'm not saying mature in general, but when do our bodies start to become ready to reproduce? When puberty hits, right? And puberty doesn't hit you until, of course, nowadays it's getting sooner, but puberty doesn't tend to hit you till 8, 9, 10, even 12, 13 years till after you're born. That's a long time for an organism to try to, to be ready to procreate. Okay, now again, I say that physiologically, because I don't know any 12-year-olds that are ready to procreate, but it does happen. Okay. Again, us as a species, we just have not been threatened enough to the point. There hasn't been a big enough disease, a big enough war, just a big enough problem yet to really, get us to the point where reproduction is going to be a big issue with us, So, um, but reproduction is important, and this is a big one. Your book doesn't put this in there, but I like to mention this: growth and evolution. Okay, growth is necessary for life to take place, obviously, because when you're first born, you can't defend yourself, you can't take care of yourself. Okay, physiologically, you're not. I mean, you're barely mature to do anything. Okay, so as a result, we need to grow to become a viable, sustainable, self-sustainable organism. Okay, and also another part of growth is becoming mature enough so we can procreate and, again, maintain the continuity of our species. Okay, and evolution as well. And again, this is where the open-mindedness aspect comes in, because just the sound of this word makes people kind of cringe. Okay, and again, when evolution is just about change, that's all it is. I mean, I'm not talking about this, I'm not trying to explain, try to come up with an idea of where life began, and try to battle with religion and all that stuff. People that do that have too much time on their hands. Okay, evolution is just about change. That's all it is. Okay, it's about adapting to environments, survival of the fittest. Evolution does occur, plain and simple, and we need to evolve as well. Okay, we need to evolve to changes that occur in our environment, and basically it's pretty simple. Any animal that does not evolve to survive will die. Okay, and obviously, we have to we have done that to get to where we are today, and we must continue to do so, or else we will not survive. Okay, so again, I know I didn't mention all 11 organ systems in this. I just kind of briefly put some in here, but again, think about this. Think about which organ systems drive each of these when it comes to the individuality and function of ourselves. And also, for survival needs, we need things like oxygen, nutrition. Okay, oxygen, obviously, I mean, everybody knows that. Oxygen is what a big part of making ATP and cellular energy. Oxygen is a big metabolic fuel for us. Okay, nutrition, we need calories. Okay, we need fuel. We need to stay, we need fuel to stay alive, but not just for driving and to make energy. I mean, we need to get enough protein in ourselves so we can make enough plasma proteins. We need enough proteins in our blood. We need enough structure. I mean, people that are protein deficient, they look very wasted away because you're digesting your own meat, your muscle tissue, to try to get protein. Okay, so nutrition is more than just getting calories for energy. We need vitamins, minerals, proteins, fats for energy storage, for structural purposes, for driving metabolic reactions. I mean, there's a lot that goes into nutrition. That's why there's a whole class for that. Water, water is big because water is our main transport medium. The bulk of your body is water. I mean, whether you're talking about tissue fluids or blood, the average person, we can say, arguably has about 40 liters of water, in their systems. If you look at, in all of their tissues and their bloodstream, that's a lot of water. Okay, but again, and plus water also helps drive chemical reactions. But again, without water, we wouldn't be able to circulate anything around our body, or we'd have to figure something else out. Okay, but water is extremely important. Plus, we use water to cool ourselves as a thermal regulator as well. Okay, temperature. Temperature is big. Okay, if we don't maintain a proper temperature, you guys all know, everybody knows what the average human temperature is, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, but without temperature, our metabolism is going to go nuts. Okay, our metabolism and our ability to circulate oxygen are going to be greatly hindered. Okay, and if those two get hindered, you're going to die. Okay, so that's why if your temperature gets too high or too low and you don't reverse that, there's going to be problems. And pressure. You guys are probably thinking, pressure, what? Why pressure? Okay, pressure is important, especially for when it comes to breathing. Okay, for when it comes to transport. Okay, you think about blood pressure. No one ever talks about blood pressure in a good context, because everyone always talks about blood pressure when they have high blood pressure, when there's some pathology going on, when there's, But blood pressure is necessary because without pressure, how would we circulate blood around the body? Okay, without pressure, how would we filter nutrients? How would we filter nutrients out of capillaries into our tissues? Okay, so we need pressure to drive flow, to drive exchange. Okay, same thing when it comes to breathing. As we breathe air in, there has to be enough pressure to drive oxygen into the bloodstream from our air sacs in our lungs, and a certain amount of pressure to drive carbon dioxide out of our blood. Okay, so pressure is important. All right, and if pressures go awry and we don't adapt to that again, you're going to have a hard time with breathing and with circulation. Okay. So again, that's just kind of some stuff to think about in terms of just what constitutes life, what life is, the purposes of life and things like that. I'll go much more in depth with that later on in other topics. Excuse me, but think about this. And homeostasis is a big concept to know and understand as well. Okay, homeostasis is something we're striving for on a day-to-day basis. Homeostasis is basically the maintenance of a stable internal environment. I view this as physiologic balance. Okay, now basically when we talk about homeostasis, think about a concept called a dynamic equilibrium, meaning this means that basically there are certain set points that we operate around, okay? And we're always going to fluctuate around these set points, but if we fluctuate too far and don't return back to normal, that's a disease. So for example, let's just keep it simple for now. Let's just say your body temperature, 98.6, degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, you know that your body temperature goes up and down all the time throughout the day. Okay, right now, up here in Minnesota, it's not exactly warm outside this time of year, in late December. Okay, so you go outside, the cold air outside is going to make your body temperature go down. Okay, but we have physiologic mechanisms to protect us from this, and which help us reverse the drop in body temperature. Okay, body water levels. There's so much water. We maintain our body water levels by maintaining or by monitoring sodium levels. Okay, and if our what's called our osmolarity drops below a certain point, okay, if our body salt starts to get too high, then we become dehydrated. Okay, and we have to get the water back in our system. Okay, and so on. All right, so basically, there are certain set points, or 300 milliosmoles of sodium per liter of water, but basically you get the picture here. Okay, so that's homeostasis, maintaining balance, and part of that balance is that there are certain points. Now the question is, how do we know what these points are? How do we know what a normal body temperature is, what a normal sodium level is in the body? How do we know, our nutrient levels, our metabolism, and such and so on? Okay, what organ system do you think is responsible for the constant maintenance or the monitoring of this? What do you think it'd be? This is what I view the most important system in the human body, the nervous system. Okay, there are some organs that are self-regulating, but for the most part, the nervous system does its job. That's its main job. And I'll talk more about this in a minute. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, if we fail to return back to our normal set points, this is where disease and sickness occurs. For example, blood pressure. Okay, blood pressure does go up. If you're sitting down for a long period of time and then you stand up and start to walk or run or move around, your blood pressure is going to go up to meet the increased demand on your body. But there are, as we age, blood pressure does tend to rise, okay? And we do have mechanisms that help us compensate for rises in blood pressure, but if those mechanisms aren't good enough, or if they start to fail and our blood pressure remains high, that's a disease. That's hypertension, high blood pressure, okay? So as a result, if we are unable to return, back to these set points on our own, that's where medical intervention comes in. That's when you hear about people taking high blood pressure medications. That's where we need help, okay, to get our physiology back to normal. All right, so that's the concept of homeostasis, maintaining balance, okay, and we maintain balance through basically what are called feedback loops. Okay, feedback loops. So basically, like I mentioned earlier, we have this constant monitoring system, the nervous system. Okay, again, there are some organs that do kind of self-regulate themselves. For example, if you want to kind of go in depth and read about insulin secretion and things like that, that's more of a kind of a self-regulatory thing. Okay, but for the most part, just think in general, the nervous system, regulates everything. Okay, and And when the nervous system detects changes in the body, we have to figure out how to return back to normal. And that's what we use these feedback loops for. And there are two types of feedback loops: negative feedback and positive feedback. Okay, and let's kind of look at some examples of these. Okay, when we're talking about a feedback loop, obviously, when you think of loop, you should think, oh, this has got to be something circular. Okay. So when we talk about negative feedback, this is the most common regulatory mechanism in the human body. Okay, negative feedback. All right, and there are three major components of a negative feedback loop: the receptor, a control center, and an effector organ. Okay, so let's talk about these. So negative feedback begins with the receptor. Okay, so basically what a receptor is, it's a specialized cell or group of cells within the nervous system that their main job, their only job, is to detect changes, okay, to detect what are called stimuli, or a stimulus for singular. Just think of a stimulus or a stimuli as just factors that could upset our physiology, that disrupt our physiology. They're changes in our environment that disrupt our well-being. Okay, and that's what these receptors are there for. That's all they do, is they're constantly waiting for a stimulus. Okay, so for example, then a receptor detects a change. Okay, but that's all they do. They're just there to detect a change. Okay, and then what they do is they generate, impulses to what we call a control center. Okay, and you guys probably are already thinking what the main control center is in the body. You guys are probably already thinking the brain. Okay, and that's right. We'll go a little more with this and say the central nervous system, the brain, and the spinal cord. Okay, but the central nervous system is our main control center. Receptors pick up on these changes. Excuse me. They send the information about these changes to our control center, and then your control center basically develops a plan of attack. Okay, how in the world do we go about bringing ourselves back to normal? And when your control center gets this figured out, then it communicates with what's called an effector organ. Oops, sorry. Okay, the effector organ, then what it does, it carries out the right response to get us back to normal. Okay, and then once we return back to our normal set point, the receptors shut off, the control center shut off, and the effector organ shut off. Because if we overdo this response, that could lead to pathologic problems as well. So let's give an example and kind of make this come a little more to life. Whoa, what's going on here? Okay, let's bring this a little more to life here. Okay, a good example of, or I should say a classical example, that when people like to talk about negative feedback is a thermostat. Okay, because let's say again, let's use up here in Minnesota as an example. Okay, you go out for groceries. Okay, and you come back home. Okay, and let's say you grab more groceries than you can carry in one trip, and you leave your front door open while you're going in and out to your car. Okay, and a bunch of cold air comes in. All right, and let's say you've got your thermostat set at 70 degrees, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, you got your thermostat set at 70. All right, so now, and let's say it's 0 degrees outside. Okay, so that's a lot of, and it takes you 3 minutes to get the groceries in and out of your car. Okay, so you left that door open for 3 minutes, and for that 3 minutes, very cold air poured into the house. Okay, or your apartment or wherever you live. All right, so now that cold air came in, and as a result, that brought the temperature of your room or the house down. Okay, that brought that down. Let's just say it was the temperature of the kitchen. Okay, the temperature of the kitchen went down. Okay, so as a result, something had to pick up on this, and coincidentally, the thermostat is also the receptor in this as well. Okay, so basically what happens, your normal set point, the normal ambient air temperature of that room went down. Okay, and let's say it dropped, let's just say it dropped down to 65 degrees, just for the sake of discussion. Okay, it dropped down to 65, and then now the thermostat basically picks up on that change. All right. So now all of a sudden, and then what the thermostat is going to do is it detects this, and then it's going to start sending impulses or electrical, feedback to the heater. Okay, and then your heater is going to kick on. Okay, and your heater is going to obviously start pumping out heat because your set point for that room is 70 degrees. Okay, so then as your heater, as your heater is going to kick on, and you're going to start pouring out heat into the kitchen. Okay, but you're only going to generate heat until you get back to 70 degrees. So the effector organ in this would obviously be the heater. Okay, and then when you return, when the temperature of that room, let's say the heater stays on for 10, 15 minutes, whatever it takes, okay, and the temperature gets up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit again, then all of this shuts off. Okay, because you don't need to run, because what's going to happen if your heater just continues to run and keeps cranking out heat? It's not going to get to it's going to go above and beyond 70 degrees. Let's say it gets up to 95 degrees in that house, it's going to be very uncomfortable. You're not going to want to live. It's going to be hard to function in there. Okay, same thing with our body. Okay, if we don't shut off the response, okay, that could kill us. If we over-secrete a hormone, while trying to get ourselves back to normal and we don't turn it off, you hear a lot about thyroid disorders that revolve around that. And I'll talk more about that when we get to the endocrine system. So let's use an example in the body. Okay, let's use an example in the body. So let's I've been talking about blood pressure a while. Let's just kind of stay on that. Okay, so let's say your blood pressure goes up. Okay, your normal blood pressure is, as 120 over 80 millimeters of mercury. Okay, and your blood pressure rises, and let's say it goes up to, let's just say it goes up to 145 over 86 millimeters of mercury. Okay, we need to get it back down, because if it's that high, if we're exercising, sure, we want it to go up a little bit, but when we're done, we don't want it to stay that high. Okay, so the blood pressure goes up. Okay, there's going to be a receptor called a baroreceptor. Baro means pressure. Okay, these baroreceptors are found in your carotid arteries. Okay, they're found in your carotid arteries in your neck. Okay, in what are called the carotid sinuses. So these are receptors that are sensitive to only changes in blood pressure. Okay, so the blood pressure goes up. Okay, the blood pressure goes up. These receptors detect that. So then what they do is they then start to communicate with a control center. Okay, they communicate with a control center. All right, and that control center is going to be your brain stem. Okay, obviously, your central nervous system part of your brain. Okay, it's going to communicate with your brain stem, and then so that would be the control center. And then the effector organs in this situation, there are going to be two of them. One is going to be the heart, and the other one's going to be blood vessels, the arteries of your arterioles of your body. Two things are going to happen in this. What do you think is going to happen to your heart rate? Our blood pressure is really high, so what are we going to want to do to our heart rate? We're going to want to get it down. Okay? And as our heart rate goes down, the output of blood, the volume of blood that's pumped out of it goes down, and that will help bring blood pressure back down to normal. Okay? Now, what do you think we're going to do to blood vessels? Do you think we're going to dilate or constrict them? Are we going to increase their diameter, or are we going to decrease their diameter? If we want to get blood pressure down, we want to dilate them. Okay. So then what's going to happen is, so then our blood vessels, so the combination of our heart rate going down and our blood vessels becoming wider and allowing much easier blood flow with less pressure, that will bring our blood pressure back down to normal. Okay, and once we return back down to, this 120 over 80, then this entire response will shut off. Okay, because what's going to happen if our blood pressure starts to get too low? Okay, let's say this response didn't shut off and you kept going down, 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 down. Okay, what's going to happen is you're going to pass out. Okay, because your brain's not going to get enough oxygen. Okay, your major organs aren't going to get enough oxygen, but you're going to pass out because your brain doesn't get enough. You probably heard of this. People that have vasovagal syncope, they get stressed. This is the response that's turned on, high stress situations, like exercise or anxiety. to get your blood pressure down. There are some people that just, they're a little too sensitive to stress and they pass out because of this. Okay, if our blood pressure got too low and we didn't circulate enough blood to your brain, you can do the math on what's going to happen. Okay, so that's negative feedback. Again, this is the most common regulatory mechanism we have in the body. Okay, and it typically operates under this premise, under these three components: a receptor, a control center, and an effector organ. Okay, and bear in mind that this is designed to negate or change a stimulus. Okay, this is designed to get us back down to normal and then shut off. Okay, and then it'll turn on again once we get away from that normal set point again. That's negative feedback. Okay, positive feedback, on the other hand, this is what we call an amplifying cycle. Okay. An amplifying cycle. Okay, positive feedback is good, but it can be life-threatening as well, because this is a response that gets greater and greater and greater over time. So just like negative feedback, there has to be some kind of stimulus that triggers a positive feedback loop to begin. Okay, but now this is where the difference comes in. Okay, let's say we go with childbirth. Okay, basically once the uterus gets stretched to a certain point, okay, you're going to really start generating nervous potentials to the brain, and the brain's going to start to release a hormone called oxytocin. Okay, because that uterus, it got to stretch. Okay, we need it, and so basically, what would be the stimulus in this situation? The baby, obviously, the baby within the uterus that put the stretch on. Okay, so then what's going to happen is oxytocin is going to make the smooth muscle of the uterus start to contract. Okay, it's going to make it start to contract. That's a labor contraction. Okay, now those of you who are listening to this that have had kids before, what happens with labor contractions over time? Okay, they don't get more pleasant, they get worse. Okay, the intensity goes up, and also the amount of time in between them goes down. Okay, they start out about 20-30 minutes apart, and they start to get to about 20-30 seconds apart once you're about ready to give birth. Okay, so there's a stimulus that activated this response, but the response continued to enhance. It became greater and greater and greater as time goes on. Okay, and the only thing that's going to shut positive feedback off is when the stimulus, in this situation is the baby, is removed from the body. Okay, so the removal of the stimulus is what turns off positive feedback. Okay, and this can be threatening because, for example, a fever is another example of positive feedback. When you get sick, you have some kind of pathogen like a virus or a bacteria within you. Okay, and you have this big initial spike in body temperature. Okay, and then you kind of maintain this high body temperature, or may continue to slowly rise. Okay, but as we just discussed, if your body temperature does get too high, that could kill you. Okay, and this does happen with some people, is they just get too severe fevers, and that may require medical intervention. I mean, I remember once I had a fever that was 104.9 degrees. That really was not fun. Okay. Blood clotting mechanisms, forming blood clots is another example of positive feedback. Okay, and people that, form too many clots, if you get a clot stuck in the circulation somewhere, that may occlude blood flow to an essential organ somewhere. Okay, so in the end, positive feedback, yes, it's good, but the problem is if it's too intense or sticks around too long, it can threaten our life. Okay, but again, this is a feedback loop. Okay, because you have the stimulus. Okay, the receptors in the uterus are picking up on this. They're communicating with the control center, the brain, on this. But the difference here is the brain is continuing to amplify and amplify and amplify, make the response greater and greater and greater until the stimulus is gone. Okay, with negative feedback, you only carry out the stimulus you need to get yourself back to a certain set point, and then you stop. Okay, because you're not going to get rid of body temperature. You're not going to get rid of body water. You're not going to get rid of all your body water. Okay. So that's positive and negative feedback. And again, that's what we need to use to maintain and regulate homeostasis, okay, physiologic balance, okay. And like I said, this is what our everyday life revolves around, keeping ourselves balanced, keeping all of our set points in check to keep ourselves alive, okay. And these are the major chapter 1 topics and concepts you need to understand. In chapter 2's presentation, I'll talk a little more about some general chemistry concepts, and then we'll transition from there into general cell biology concepts, and then into histology. So if you have any, again, folks, if you have any questions, please contact me. Those of you who are my YouTube listeners, if you want a copy of this presentation, this PowerPoint presentation, email me. To have it on paper, email me, and I'll be happy to email you a copy of this. So take care, folks, and have a good one. Yeah, let's